Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We got Ryan Grimm in the show. He's going to talk about what President Trump could or might do vis-a-vis Iran in his final days of his presidency. We've got Greg Bluestein on, fantastic reporter we've relied on from the beginning in Georgia. He's going to give us a preview of that race. We've got a fantastic panel in the House, and we do, in fact, want to start with those two incredibly significant races down in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, that's right. Battle for the United States Senate, both in the state of Georgia. And the state of Georgia went Democratic this time around. Who the hell knew how that was going to happen? President Trump actually visited there yesterday, and there are a lot of questions basically given, what's going on with the election and Congress here in Washington, some of his own attacks on the governor of Georgia, how all of that is going to play. He hasn't exactly changed his tactics or anything. Let's take a listen.
Stacey Abrams. What's with this Stacey Abrams? Your governor and your secretary of state, they're petrified of Stacey Abrams. What's that all about? Did you see this consent decree they signed? With signature verification, you can forget about it. What they have done to your state, I think most people have no idea what they've done to your state. That consent decree and these two people, I don't know. They say they're Republicans. I really don't think they are. They can't be.
That's the ultimate question, Krystal, which is that, so you see, he also said, hey, I'll be back here in a year. I'm going to be campaigning against Brian Kemp. Now, I don't like Brian Kemp, so, I'm not like a defender here or anything. But it's a very interesting situation because Trump is basically casting the GOP basically within his image. In many cases, that is true if you look at the base. Mm-hmm. But on the margins, this matters a lot because what happened, which is that Perdue and Loeffler both outperformed Trump on the Georgia stage.
Yes.
So that's actually the key part here, which is that these suburban voters, there were tens of thousands of voters in Georgia, hundreds of thousands of voters across the country, mainly in these suburban type districts, who voted R for their senator, for their congressman, maybe even the rest of the ticket, but then voted Joe Biden up at the top.
Yeah.
And so the ultimate question throughout this has always been, how will Trump's, election contesting, will that impact those suburban voters once again? Are they going to go out and associate Perdue and Loeffler with Trump's efforts? Now, Perdue and Loeffler have both backed Trump's efforts. Loeffler actually said she's going to vote against certification of the election in the Senate. I'm not sure where Perdue stands right now. So the ultimate question is, are those voters who came out, and if they could be trusted again, are they going to vote for Perdue and Loeffler again? Or are they going to punish them for what they perceive is going along with Trump?
Or just not show up.
Or may not vote at all, right?
So the overall context and landscape here is that these races should be a gimme for the Republicans. Mm-hmm. If you look at Georgia, yes, Georgia is trending blue. Georgia is not a blue state. Joe Biden won it by the skin of his teeth. He outperformed, as you said, both of these Democrats on the ballot in November. And historically, Republicans improved their performance in these runoff elections. It's been forever since Georgia had a Democratic senator. This should be a gimme for Republicans. The fact that it's not is 100% the blame of Donald Trump. This election stop the steal nonsense, the way that he handled the $2,000 check thing and really jammed these two Republicans, gave the Democrats an incredible talking point. Reverend Warnock is running an ad that's literally vote for me and you'll get $2,000, right? Which is actually, and that's what I'm going to talk about in my radar, that's actually might be true. Even Joe Biden has sensed those political wins and is now saying, look, if we win these two seats, we're going to bring $2,000 checks to the floor. We'll see if that actually happens. But that's the overall context that you have to remember. You also have to remember, so there was less ticket splitting in this election than ever in history.
Yes.
People are totally, polarized, tribal, partisan. But at the margins, there were some people in Georgia, as you pointed out, who voted for Joe Biden and voted for the Republicans in the Senate races. Do they need some of those people to pull off these wins today on the ground? Yeah, probably.
No, they're not.
They probably do.
Not probably. They need them. They have to get them.
Right. So by going all in on the Trump strategy, bringing him down and all of his insanity, you are putting yourself in a really dangerous situation. And by the way, Trump's approval rating has fallen, which is unusual, again, historically. Usually when incumbent presidents lose, after they lose, we kind of feel, it wasn't so bad, and the approval rating goes up. His approval rating has only plummeted, and the largest drop has actually come among Republicans. So look, has his base abandoned him? No, they still love him. But you only need a little bit of shift on the margins in order to make incredibly tight races like this in play. Nate Silver has the latest in terms of the polls. Treat this very, very
Lots
skeptically.
Of grains of salt.
Interestingly, so basically in both of these races, these are averages of polls, of course, and both of them show the Democrats with about a 2-point lead. I think it's unlikely you get a split decision here. I think either you're going to have both of them go Republican or both of them go Democratic. So it's about a 2-point lead that the polls are showing. That's almost exactly by how much Trump outperformed his polls in the state of Georgia. Democrats are fairly pessimistic about their chances in these races today. So take all of that into account. But again, the fact that these races are even as close and competitive as they are, with some early turnout data that really does favor the Democrats, that blame on the Republican side lays squarely at the feet of Donald Trump.
This is the crazy thing about Trump, which is that if the Republicans win, it will be because of Trump. And if the Democrats win, it will also be because of Trump. So it's like he is the ultimate polarizer. As in, I don't think that these Republicans would be able to bring it across the line if it wasn't for him.
You don't think that people are going to be voting in droves for John Ossoff?
Right, exactly.
Or the exciting prospect of Kelly Loeffler?
Yeah, and I'm like, neither of these people are particularly great, right? And so, same thing whenever it comes to the Democrats. Now, I would say, and this is why I think it's key, which is we're really going to find out how much of that has translated from the Lynn Wood, Sidney Powell, and Trump, obviously. I mean, he was on that phone call. He was reciting still many of the Dominion voting stuff. Like, he believes this much to his core, and he was telling the Georgia Secretary of State, being like, people are not going to forget this. Maybe they won't come out and vote. So, I mean, he certainly understands the political implications of people may not come out and vote. And yesterday he said, he's like, I don't really go anywhere for anybody else. I come here for me, which I thought was funny because he was there to campaign on behalf of Perdue and Loeffler. That's really the question in my mind, which is that if there's a surprise, clearly, look, I'll be clear. I think the Republicans are both going to win tonight. I think it is largely insurmountable, special election, all of that. But if there is a loss, I think it will largely be because of these Trump efforts. And the $2,000 checks is another one where, again, Trump, he was out of the process and all of that. But then that's on Mitch McConnell. I actually think that one is 100% on Mitch McConnell. He held that up for no particular reason. Well, I mean, we know the reason. He held up those $2,000 checks. And, I mean, it would be a little bit of karmic justice if it actually did happen. By the way, he would still remain the Senate Majority Leader. The Senate Minority Leader. There's no question in my mind that he would lose his leadership or anything like that.
Yeah.
But so it's very multifaceted. If the turnout tracks with how it was last time, we actually have a map. Let's throw that up there on the screen. You can just see whenever those areas that went blue in the traditional suburban districts in the metropolitan area, once again, if those are the ones who on the margins put Warnock and Ossoff over the top, then I think you have a combination of you could blame Trump and you could blame Mitch McConnell. And that really should be the post-game analysis if that happens. Again, I don't think that's actually likely. 2.2%, given how things turned out in 2020. And I hate to say it, but the hidden Trump thing is absolutely true. Maybe not even in the polling, but just polling methodology is obviously flawed. Given all of that, I think Republicans are going to do pretty well tonight. So
it's interesting, the map that we just had up there. Part of why, this is sort of a Trumpian factor, but it's like a second-order Trumpian factor. Part of why I think Democrats have a better shot here than they ordinarily do in Georgia is because of the nature of the changing coalition. So why is it that usually, historically, Republicans improve their performance in runoffs? It's because turnout is down, and who always shows up to vote? Suburban white people and old people. Well, those are the people who have increasingly moved into the Democratic camp. And so it gives Democrats a stronger opportunity here. I agree with you. I think you would have to say, like, the favorites tonight are the Republicans. If Democrats pull off one or two of these races, that would be a major upset. And we've been saying that, by the way, since election night. Basically, like, my actually hopes for Democrats here have improved over the months based on Trump's actions and also based on the early turnout data that we have. But I still think you're right that they would be underdogs tonight and come into this as underdogs. But because of that suburban coalition, moving to the Democratic Party, you have more reliable voters here would show up in a special election, in a runoff election. And by the way, the turnout has been insanely high. Let's go through Nate Cohn. Analysis at the New York Times, went through that early turnout data. And he says, look, essentially, and this should not surprise anyone, of course, Democrats have been stronger in the mail-in ballot, just like they were back in November. So he lays out here what David Perdue would need to do in order to prevail over Jon Ossoff. He says, look, let's stipulate that absolutely no one has changed their vote since the election. Let's assume that everybody's locked into who their candidate is. If so, then right now, Ossoff has a lead of around 350,000 votes out of the advance vote, including what he'll net out of the 100,000 absentee votes still to arrive. So that's how much Perdue would have to make up on Election Day. He says there's some fuzziness in these estimates. One rough way to see in the general election, Ossoff won 51.6% of the major party advance vote, and Dem primary voters representing 49.9% of the advance vote. In the runoff, it was D 53.1 yesterday, projected to 53.4 after mail done. That's a 3.5 point shift, and our estimate is 55.5. So all of that is a way of saying Democrats are actually doing better right now in the early vote than they even were coming into November, when we know that they were vastly outperforming, which gave people a lot of expectation about Democratic performance.
My current theory of politics is that if one side is this ginned up, I think that the other side is
just
too.
as ginned
And
up.
I didn't think that going into 2020, which is why I thought that the Dems had a way better chance and that the numbers would be better off for Biden and for in many of these Senate races. But now, and this is the thing, we seem our institutions to be very well calibrated in order to track Democrats, Democratic turnout, Democratic enthusiasm. For some reason, we just don't have that, whenever it comes to measuring the right. So given what happened with 2020, how close the election was, I mean, we're talking about 60,000. I mean, in Georgia, we're talking about 11,000 votes. Like, that's just not that many votes. So when I look at this, if I see that there's a proportionate increase in Democratic early turnout, my mind is automatically just saying, okay, that means that there's going to be a proportionate amount of increase in the Republican side. I don't think we can discount just how bombarded the state of Georgia has been with $1 billion in partisan advertising on both sides, right? So once again, we're coming into a situation where it is ginning up both of yours and just seeing where things are going to go. The general reason why is that the stakes are highest for the Republicans. And I think a general Republican voter is going to know that. They're going to know this is the bulwark in the Senate. The ads and many of the things that Loeffler and Perdue have been running are like, you don't want this program to pass. And I do think that there is a lot to that. Whereas the affirmation of voting for and I mean, it's not like Biden has been giving them a reason to vote, right? He's not like, come out and vote for me and we'll pass this immensely popular program. He just got on board with $2,000 checks yesterday, right?
Well, and that's the big missed opportunity for Democrats is really, it took you until last night to be like, we're going to get $2,000 checks.
Yes.
And in fairness, the candidates on the ground have been more on top of that message. But we said this from the jump, that this should, if Democrats are smart, they will make this entire race a referendum on stimulus and especially on checks. They haven't really done that. Two other things that I think are really important going into tonight. First of all of those warnings that we had for you about the general election and how the votes would come in, that is still the case, all right? So you'll recall the way Georgia worked on election night. Isn't Georgia the one where the needle had Trump winning 90-something%? And then it flipped back because the early votes come in later. The day of vote is going to be strongly Republican. So you could easily have a situation where, number one, we don't know who wins tonight. And number two, where it looks like the Republicans are doing really well and there's a Democratic comeback. Will it be enough or not? We don't know. But just remember those dynamics and those cautions, wait and watch until all of the results are in and don't pay too much attention to the New York Times needle either. I'm not even sure if they're doing the needle. So that's number one. Number two, also interesting to know what Wall Street wants to happen in these races. This is from our great friend over at CNBC, Brian Schwartz, reporting that Wall Street has gone in strongly behind the Republicans here. Now, why? When, Wall Street gets a lot of what they want out of Democrats as well. Wall Street loves divided government. because that means not a lot happens, and the system is already insanely rigged in their favor, so they're perfectly fine and happy for basically nothing to happen. So that's what they're cheering for.
That's now you have all the information. Can't wait for another election where we don't know the results for like 4 more days.
I'm sure that's going to really calm tensions here in this town,
especially here in
country.
Washington, where everything's boarded up already, and it's great to be back, folks. All right, let me tell you what's on our radars. That's next.